You know what they did, and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense, and you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk.
That infamous January 2021 phone call between Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and former President Trump was prominently featured at today's Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack. The call is also at the center of an investigation in the state of Georgia. Tamar Hallerman is a senior reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and is here now to discuss how this call sparked a lawsuit in Georgia. Hi, good to be with you. Thanks for being here. So not only was this phone call at the center, really, of the investigation into January 6th and everything that came after, but it also set off a state investigation in Georgia about potential election interference. What more can you tell us about where things stand in Georgia after the special grand jury was impaneled?
Absolutely. A 23-person special grand jury, as you mentioned, Caitlin, was impaneled last month. They've been hearing from key witnesses for the last couple of weeks, starting with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who came in on June 2nd. He was followed by his wife and a parade of current and former aides, including Gabe Sterling, his deputy, who testified today on Capitol Hill. And they've been hearing from a bevy of witnesses who have been involved one way or another. Most recently today from Georgia's Attorney General Chris Carr, who spoke with Donald Trump in the aftermath of the 2020 election, who was concerned about Mr. Carr, a Republican who was opposed to a Texas lawsuit at the Supreme Court that sought to invalidate Georgia's election results. So lots of action going on here. We're expecting witnesses to continue to speak to that special grand jury. And we're, of course, waiting for a recommendation about whether or not the local DA here in Fulton County whether she should indict President Trump, whether she should seek to press charges against a former president, which has never happened in the history of the United States.
Certainly something everybody is watching. And Tamar, do you think that evidence presented in the hearing today could actually factor into that investigation in Georgia?
It certainly is possible. It feels like all of the evidence that's been laid out by the committee over the last couple days is really helping kind of lay the groundwork for Donald Trump and kind of what he knew and didn't know in the aftermath of the election as he was pushing these claims of massive fraud. And I think some of that could help DA Willis at the local level here, should she decide to push charges against Donald Trump. She has to establish that there was enough criminal intent, that Donald Trump and his allies knew that what they were asking for was illegal. And so I think that a lot of the evidence being laid out by the January 6th committee could help the DA should she decide to press charges.
And do we know what else, do we know anything else about the potential charges that she could be considering against the former president?
Yeah, in a letter to state officials about a year ago when she announced that she was starting to investigate, she laid out about a half dozen potential laws that might have been broken here in Georgia. That includes criminal solicitation to commit election fraud, which carries with it a maximum of 1 to 3 years in prison. There's intentional interference with the performance of election duties. There's conspiracy. There's even racketeering was something that she laid out in her letter. There's also the possibility of something like forgery. I've heard from some legal experts who've been looking into the role of these alternative Republican electors who filed fake documents in Georgia.
Why that phone call and the tape of that phone call is pretty damning, and so we'll see what they are able to find. Today we also heard in this hearing from an elections worker in Georgia named Shay Moss. She gave a very emotional testimony about the death threats that she received after Donald Trump called her out by name. Let's take a listen.
I felt horrible. I felt like it was all my fault. Like, if I would have never decided to be an elections worker, like, I could have done anything else, but that's what I decided to do. And now people are lying and spreading rumors and lies and attacking my mom. I'm her only child. Going to my grandmother's house. I'm her only grandchild. I felt horrible for picking this job and being the one that always wants to help and always there, and never missing out one election. I just felt like it was my fault for putting my family in this situation.
So, Tamar, as you know, I mean, election workers are just everyday people. I mean, you can't imagine when you sign up to do this work that you'd eventually be called in to give testimony in a hearing about an insurrection. But what else did Moss say about, how this 2020 election really changed her life?
I know, really heartbreaking testimony from her. She spoke about why she loved her job so much in the first place, especially getting to connect with more elderly citizens, being able to help them. She talks about even going to the hospital to help deliver an absentee ballot request and how much that filled her with purpose and satisfaction, and how the zest to do that job completely went away in the aftermath of the election. She doesn't want to give out her business card. She's scared to go places. She's had to hide and change her appearance. And so has her mother, Ruby Friedman, who was called out by the president by name in his phone call with Brad Raffensperger. So heartbreaking when you consider these rank and file election workers, people just like you and me who want to do their civic duty, help protect our right to vote. And, so many of them feel like they don't want to do it anymore. It was heartbreaking when she said of all the people who she worked with at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, counting votes 2 years ago, she said she doesn't know of anyone who still is doing that line of work. And it's just heartbreaking for the future of our elections.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I was really struck by that line as well, especially as you consider that these threats to election officials, but election workers are nationwide. I mean, we're hearing these stories across the country. Election workers are not typically at the center of all of this. And, secretaries of state, quite frankly, aren't usually people that the vast majority of Americans know. But Brad Raffensperger, of course, has become kind of a household name because of that phone call. We've all heard a lot from him. But is there anything that you heard today from Raffensperger or his colleague Gabe Sterling, who people might remember gave that very impassioned call, for the president to condemn a lot of these attacks? Anything that you heard today that you hadn't heard before?
Yeah, and this came more from the committee than it did from Brad Raffensperger or Gabe Sterling. I didn't know that Trump was trying to send White House swag to elections investigators in Georgia as kind of like a thank you if they did what he wanted them to do, to find more votes that would reverse Joe Biden's win in Georgia. That was interesting to me. And really just hearing more from Gabe Sterling and Brad Raffensperger about what they were feeling in that moment, the kind of helplessness when it came to trying to combat a lot of this misinformation in the aftermath of the 2020 elections. The quote that from Gabe Sterling that really stuck with me, he talked about holding frequent press conferences to try and combat misinformation. He described he felt like a shovel trying to empty the ocean. He said he felt like he could get his points across, but it was so hard when you're going up against a man with the biggest microphone in the entire world, which was Donald Trump at the time.
Yeah, and hearing from Moss, we heard the consequences that kind of information actually has on people. Raffensperger is up for re-election this term. He fended off a Republican primary challenge who was supported by Donald Trump as kind of a vendetta against Raffensperger. But there was a runoff for his Democratic challenger, and that's happening today. Do you have any sense of how Raffensperger might fare in this general election? Does he stand a good chance of getting reelected?
I mean, I think so. And remember that this is, Governor Kemp is at the top of the ballot. We have a very competitive race for Senate here with Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. So there's going to be much broader dynamics at play here that could help or potentially hurt Brad Raffensperger. He's not going to be out there all by himself. And I think a lot of people thought he was going to be dead in the water going up into his Republican primary last month. And he very convincingly defeated not only kind of a crowded field of a half dozen candidates, but also a Trump-backed congressman who we thought would at the very least drag him into a Republican runoff. So the fact that he was able to win so convincingly is a good sign for him. At the same time, it's very possible he could be up against a well-known Democrat here. Should she get out of her primary runoff tonight, Bee Nguyen, who's a well-known state state legislator and seen as a rising star here in Georgia. There's also a libertarian candidate who could act as a spoiler in November and drag that race into a December runoff. So that's certainly a dynamic we'll be watching.
All right, Georgia at the center of the political universe once again. I'm sure we'll be talking to you a lot, Tamar. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate your reporting.
Thank you.